Frederik, I just have to ask you, are the dots helpful or are they a distraction at this point?
It's a good question, especially given the weight that you have between every single Fed member. The regional Fed president in particular tend to be a bit more hawkish than the Washington, D.C. based governor. So there is always this gap, of course, between market pricing and the dots. I think still this question for today is important, how far lower the Fed will move those dots to one hike or even zero maybe. I think it's a bit too extreme a step for today. But that's something that market will look at in terms of how the Fed adjusts to the reality of market pricing and, of course, the global environment.
Peter, what does the market misunderstand about the Fed?
Well, I think they've been caught out by the Fed over the course of the last few months. And I think one of the things which is a bit of a concern is the extent to which maybe the Fed has come, or has appeared at least, to yield to some sort of political pressure. And I think that markets have to realise that the Fed is not operating as sort of independent central bank in a vacuum. It's operating against a backdrop of a very difficult political situation in Washington. And I think we have to allow for the fact that central banks are going to become increasingly more political.
Okay, and do you think actually they are more political, or is the Fed, you know, this is a huge institution. Jay Powell is not no one, so they're just looking through political pressure?
Well, I think there's this perception in the timing of events definitely validated the idea that he was under a great deal of pressure, but there's also the pressure of markets, and that's something that both Trump, by the way, and Jay Powell felt big time at the end of last year. I think the dilemma that the Fed is facing is more relevant in terms of financial conditions. How now that financial conditions have moved higher, looser, than what we had at the end of last year. What the Fed is going to do, and perhaps not be as dovish as some would hope for.
Frederik, I loved in your note when you talk about 2.5% inflation is the new 2%. Are you concerned about overshooting on the inflation targets?
I would love to see some central banks in the world, including in Europe, being more open to overshooting inflation relative to the target. I think it's a good thing. In the case of the Fed, as you know, the Fed is reviewing its monetary policy framework, inflation targeting in particular. That's something which is a bit more theoretical, but in practice it means that indeed the pivot that the Fed just did will likely translate in some higher tolerance vis-à-vis inflation. If that's actually a problem in the data, because so far so good, core inflation on any metrics has been relatively close to 2% anyway.